Today I wanted to go through one opening, the Sicilian Schwenningen variation, followed by 5 games that people have sent in, and I think we can just get started. The Sicilian Schwenningen variation is normally done off of a specific move order, which involves black setting up e6, d6, and the knight on f6. The knight to c6 is not played. So here, e4, c5, knight f3, d6, pawn d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, and then knight c3, and then e6. So basically here, this is the Sicilian Schwenningen variation. It's characterized by these pawns on both d6 and e6. It's pretty strong, solid. Black is making kind of a less aggressive play for space in the center and more just trying to have solid control over the fifth rank. But overall here, black is in fairly good black is in fairly good position, but white still has the initiative. It's a solid, very heavily analyzed opening for both white and black. Many of white's plans involve setting up a kingside attack, while black makes attacking threats along the c-file, often with the rook. The knight sometimes plays to c6 and exchanges on the c-file on c6. If that's played, then the pawn takes on c6 eventually, either before or after the bishop takes, depending on how much of the pieces are neutralized. But then the rook gets set up on b8. And has an open line on the b2 pawn. So overall, it's a solid opening, very playable, and I just wanted to take a look at some of the main lines. There are a total of 6 different possible main lines. The lines that I know the best are bishop e2, g4, and bishop to e3. Probably bishop e3 being the one that I'm the most familiar with. But they're all basically pretty strong, and will offer white good chances, and go with the standard, the standard kingside attack. I guess I would say let's go with g4 because that specific opening theory has the most unique characteristics. This is a really early, attack on the pawn structure for white. White is basically building a kingside attack both before the king has castled and before the bishop even plays to c7 or e7. But the thing about it is basically that the rook's not going to get moved to basically the king's not going to get moved to c8. The king's almost entirely committed to castling on the king side here. So here g4 offers some opportunities for white to basically begin an attack and exert pressure even before the black king castles kingside. With that said, this makes this which is the main line out of the g4 variation, leads to a position that looks fairly uncomfortable for black post castling. I don't know if this is enough to scare black out of castling entirely, but it looks a lot more appealing with the pawns on g4, or a lot less appealing with the pawns on g4 and h4. Hey, S-Park, thank you very much for joining the stream. I think we went over your game this morning, S-Park. I hope that was helpful, or that you got to see it. Yeah, no problem at all, S-Park. Thank you very much for joining the stream, and thank you for participating and contributing material for it. It's really helpful, and I really appreciate you being here. So yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that's no problem at all. No, and actually, that's a good point. Always, look, my goal here is really just to make lessons free and available to everyone. So I'm not offended at all if you guys want to. If the schedule doesn't work, don't feel overly pressured to come and watch live. Feel free to watch video on demand. The thing that's a little bit better if you guys come to the stream live is you can tell me what your thoughts are and we can kind of go over the game together. But I'm not offended at all if the schedule doesn't work super well for you, or there's nothing, or basically it's not good for you on a particular day. We'll still go over your games, and the video on demand will be available for at least 14 days, and hopefully will be available forever once I figure out how to do that correctly. I'm actually in the process this week of making it so that all the lessons get transferred onto YouTube automatically. And then once they're on YouTube, my hope is that they will never get deleted. It'll just be on YouTube forever and always be accessible. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the games, S-Park, and thank you very much for being here. So yeah, so G4 and H4 are big moves for white, basically putting pressure on the king side before the king is even castled. This makes castling seem less appealing to me as the black player, but it still, black still castles king side in a good percentage of these games. Knight to C6, rook to G1, H5, either G takes or G5. I guess I would sort of be tempted to play G5, but G takes seems to be the main line. Now this is just, it's really difficult for black to castle kingside, and it's also difficult for black to castle queenside because the C file is open. So overall, this is tricky. I'll play the main line a few moves later just to see basic ideas in terms of getting the, getting the attack going and whether or not black even bothers to castle. At this point, black, I think, is better off castling queenside, just because, if rook gets played to G1, that's really, bad for king safety on the king side. But now I think actually this opening has basically prevented black from castling at all. I wouldn't castle here as black, so yeah, black doesn't castle in this particular line. So that's interesting. I mean, basically, G4 is played with the idea of, G4 is played with the idea of preventing, or basically causing black to, be under a lot of pressure if castling kingside. But it's committed so early that basically, black can not castle kingside entirely. Whether that's awkward, whether or not that's awkward to just not do it, that's a good question. Yeah, S-Park. Someone sent me a bunch of openings. They sent me their full repertoire of games and or of openings that they're playing. And I was just like, yeah, let's start off with a an opening for a couple days worth of lessons. And at least we'll cover that material. But you guys don't have to send games or anything like that. If you guys want to look at an opening or endgame position, it's super helpful for me actually, because I often don't know these openings as well as I should. So I get to go back and learn them. But if anyone ever prefers just a general lesson or a general topic instead of the if anyone prefers a general basically a general lesson instead of like a game review, just you can make that suggestion on the Discord, and if you're saying I'm interested in looking at this particular line of the Sicilian Dragon or this particular Scandinavian line, you can just write that on the Discord in place of a game that you send, and we'll look at it. I'll just give it the slot exactly the same way that I would give a game, and we'll make it part of the lesson. So yeah, so until at least Thursday, I think. We're starting off all the lessons with a 15-minute stream. Yeah, totally. We've done King's Indian a bit. We looked at a Nakamura game out of the King's Indian, but I'll add another King's Indian slot for May 7th at 10 a.m. I'll do like a King's Indian recap on that. I'll probably have like a game. I'll have a highlighted game maybe. But we actually did do a King's Indian stream, probably within the last 14 days. But yeah, that's perfect. I'll just give you a slot for an opening the same way that I would give a slot to a game review, and we'll do it for sure. So yeah, so someone suggested a bunch of openings, and so I have 6 slots over 3 days, I think, devoted to that concept. So yeah, anyways, thank you all for sending material and sending suggestions and games. Okay, so we're on this G4 line. The other lines here, the one that I'm the most familiar with is bishop to E3. Bishop to E3, A6, F3. This structure is basically pretty solid for white. White will end up trying to make a kingside attack here. Moves like queen D2, either bishop to D3 or bishop to E2, I think are the main moves for the bishop. And then castling queenside and then pushing the pawns on the king side, G4, H4. But a much less... basically a much more conservative, play on, the king side. Basically, with G4, which is the second most popular variation here, you're signaling immediately this king side attack. This seems risky, and signaling your attentions this early as white, I think, is a little bit, could potentially be problematic. You know, in the game that we went over briefly, you know, it keeps black from castling at all, which is probably bad, but not really what you're trying to do here. You want to play a post-castling, you know, you want to play a post-castling kingside attack. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Sprintless. Thank you for joining us. So G4, you know, basically is a very early signaling of a big attack by white on the black kingside. It would, you know, it would deter me or make me think twice about castling kingside, to be honest. Very early start on this. So, yeah, I guess bishop to e3 is what I know, so that's what we'll take a look at. Lines are a6, knight c6, bishop e7. But both sides basically develop in a straightforward way. You know, there's a lot of transpositional potential here. In this case, it looks like white's castling kingside. This is, you know, something that white can do in the Sicilian, but it means that, that the attack on black's kingside will be a little bit less pressured post-castling, and more compromising to white's kingside safety. Castles here, f4, a6, a4, queen c7, king h1, and moves like rook f3, rook g3, rook h3, probably rook g3, you know, become available to white in the near future. You know, white also may go with the g4 structure, but, you know, it gets really dangerous with the king having castled kingside. You know, the attacking pawn storms on black tend to be pretty compromising to white's king safety. So that's something to just think about when launching these attacks. You know, unlike in basically unlike in the Sicilians where white castles queenside, if white castles kingside, white needs to be a lot more cautious in the attacking on their kingside. Attacking on the kingside is still probably the correct plan for white, but it's much more double-edged when you're you know, basically compromising your own king safety to do it. Still probably the mainline plan though. Rook e8, bishop f3, rook b8, g4. So, yep, you know, as I said, the main line here is to just start launching an attack on the king side. It's dangerous, though. I mean, you've now opened this white, you know, you've opened this white diagonal on your king, so, you know, better make sure that that you, you know, protect accurately and hope that your attack on the black king side is successful. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, e5, fx, dx, bishop a7, rook a8, and basically here, you know, white is in pretty good place. Rook d8, queen e2, knight e8, and here I think, you know, I would just keep playing normally as white. You know, continue the attack, maybe bishop to h5, onto bishop to f7. But overall here, I think it's pretty solid. Bishop to e3, bishop to e6, bishop to g4. And basically here, you know, queen f2. This sacks a full exchange in a main line. I guess it's a trade because this bishop takes f1. This bishop, you know, basically white can play bishop to g3. But anyways, we've gone way down a particular line here. But I don't think that in the Scheveningen Sicilian, the bishop e2 and the bishop e3 lines are really too differentiated. They're basically the same concept. So I would say in terms of the Sicilian Scheveningen, there's three main variations here. Bishop e2, g4, bishop to e3. And I don't think, you know, I think bishop e2 and bishop to e3 sort of transpose into each other pretty frequently. They're sort of, you know, general developing ideas. The attack's going to be launched from the king side, but g4 diverges from the other two by launching it so early. Let's look at bishop e2. Bishop e2, a6, castles, bishop e7, f4, queen c7, bishop e3. And now white's, I think white's, you know, pretty much better here. This is a little bit loose. It's going to be a little bit more cautious in terms of a kingside attack, but, you know, I think basically white has a center advantage. So, you know, when they talk about the small center of the Scheveningen, this is it with the d6 and e6. You know, there's a dispute over the fifth rank, but white controls the fourth rank and has a space advantage. Good opportunity to move out his pieces. Bishop e3, bishop f3, and white's overall looking pretty good. Nothing particularly surprising here. Yeah, looks good for white. You know, basically a straightforward position where white has a spatial advantage. And in the Sicilian, you know, g4 will eventually get played. We can just keep going through a few moves, but g4 is coming for sure. Here you go. But yeah, this basically is White's plan. White has a pre-made plan to attack on the king side. He does it in most of the openings. G4 signaling this super early sometimes deters Black from castling king side at all. But overall, if White can create an early attack, he's in pretty good shape. Black will respond by trying to start play along the queen side here, but overall, it's these plans are pre-made. They're pretty well established and consistent throughout most of Schwenningen theory. Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much for the suggestion, and onto the games for analysis. I hope that helps, and we're just really scratching the surface on things that many Grandmaster books have been written about. But this gives an overview of the main general lines: G4, Bishop E2, and Bishop E3 on White's sixth move, and the defining characteristic, this E6 D6 structure. Cool. Awesome. So the next one is from Lev Saez. I will pull that up right now. Lev Saez is playing White, and we will take a look at this. So this is the Indian. This is an Indian game. Lev is playing White, so we'll take it from his perspective. But it is going to be a standard Indian position with D6, G6, and Knight F6. This is an aggressive way for White to play, or for Black to play this. This is a really early push of E5. Here, I think E5 basically potentially trades off the queen on D8 and disrupts the king position. I haven't seen much of this actually. So let's just look at the opening book. Knight F3, Knight C6 is already a little weird. Usually it's G6, and then this is like the Indian game position, or modern or Indian or whatever. But here E3, Bishop G7, H3, Indian game position. This game instead went Knight F3, Knight C6, and then White plays the relatively neutral E3. And then Black plays something completely out of the opening book, E5. I think E5 trades off the queen on D8, if I'm not mistaken. So pawn takes, and then queen takes D8, and Black is already in basically under some pressure. So knight takes here, and White's up pawn and a half. So yeah, this line simplifies in the center, but it leads to some pretty quick problems. Black is already down a pawn, and White has a better center for sure. So you've gotten a situation in which Black has basically not played a successful opening, I think. Here, bishop takes, knight takes, knight takes. Black's going to try to generate counterplay. White's king safety here is a little sketchy. But I don't really think Black has enough pieces left to exploit it. Rook to b8 and pressure on bishop to b3. Bishop takes b3 and then rook takes b3 looks pretty good for Black, but I don't think you can really establish a long-sighted attack with only 4 pieces left, 2 rooks and 2 minor pieces. Let's see. Okay. All right, interesting. And then it looks like Black hangs his piece, so that's definitely a problem. But we have one position where it gets close to equality. Here, this knight could go to e4. So let's evaluate this position. Knight e4, rook to d1, and then knight takes f2. And these rooks are getting forked, and basically, Black is in a kind of a tricky situation. Or White is in a tricky situation, about to lose material. Black is still like 2 pawns up and has the ability to advance along this king side or a queen side, but I think it's basically worse with down an exchange. I don't know how the exchange compares to the 2 pawn advantage. Maybe White can advance with c3, king c2, and then rook to d3 and then b4. There are definitely some advancing attempts for White, but it's a lot less easier and well established a plan after the exchange is lost. So bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, and then say rook h1, knight takes, or rook f1, and then rook takes d1. And here it's really very close to equality. The rook can't take c2 because of the knight, and basically white's going to be pushing these pawns on the queen side, hoping to win back either an exchange or queen a pawn. But basically it disappears white's advantage. So this basically is tactically complicated. c5, bishop takes, knight takes, rook c7, knight b3, and white's looking fine. There's no real issues until this move. And rook d1, basically this knight e4 only wins the exchange with with the tempo. I mean, you need so here rook d1, or rook a3 is the most clearly better. But rook d1 also doesn't pose nearly the same problems. It's really only this rook to d2 move, which allows this knight to advance to d4 and then forces the rook to d1, that is the problem. Rook to d1, knight takes f2. I think this should be a move that you can sort of eliminate from from your list based on the mobility that it provides the rook. So here, if you move the rook to d2, it's only got 3 spaces it can go to, one of which is covered by the bishop. This is not a very mobile rook. Maybe potentially there was the idea of providing some defense to c2, but I don't really think that's a great an idea. I think here rook a3. With rook a3, you basically control a whole file and maintain the third rank. So I think this is better. This knight is threatening c2, or this knight is defending c2 against threats, and this rook is much healthier here than it is on rook to d2. If this was played, the exchange would definitely not be lost here. So yeah, rook d2 causes a problem. Black instead hangs the bishop, and I think the game sort of resolves. But in any case, basically, yeah. So this turns out to be a win for white. But I'd like to just point out this one fundamental improvement for white in this middle game strategy. When assessing where the rook should be placed, make sure it's in a place that maximizes mobility. Rooks can, basically rooks are valuable, and in specific cases where they get, limited mobility, they can get basically trapped by a knight or a bishop, or basically like in this case. So here, the limit of the mobility on the rook on d2, should have basically, or was likely to cost white an exchange. So here, right, instead of bishop to a6, which hangs the bishop, the knight can play to d or to e4 and threaten the rook. This is an improvement for the improvement for white that I offer is one that limits the rook's mobility less, limits the basically gives it this open rank instead of this c2 defense. But the c2 defense is fine because the knight is covering it. This overall just improves the rook. Basically, rook a3 improves the rook, rook d2 worsens the rook, just based on the amount of mobility that's provided on the next move. After this, I think the game is basically over. I guess we can spend a little bit more time on the opening, but Black has played a relatively unorthodox opening, so there's not really much opening theory to draw here. The really basically the really important part of this position was right on this game, or basically right at this moment, and it offers something that I think should be a good positional lesson. Bishop plays to c4, rook plays to a3, and the rook controls the a file very cleanly. It also could potentially come back on this file if needed, but probably not. There's no real reason for it to go back. But this rook controls a bunch of squares. This rook controls basically no squares, and then the knight can get in and fork it on f2, since basically rook e2 isn't playable. It's really a question of mobility. That's the issue. So after that happens, basically black is in a pretty good, or white is in a pretty good place with knight to e4 getting missed. But that's the real key part of this position. It's a positional lesson. Otherwise, I think white played reasonably well against a pretty unsound opening. But I just want to use this opportunity to reinforce, if you don't have to, don't get your bishop or don't get your rook trapped, because the rook can get trapped by minor pieces, and if it's lost to a minor piece, that's a lost exchange for you. Rook a3 is much better, offers a positional improvement, and should put you in a pretty good position to win this game. Black played something unsound anyways, so there's not really that much there. But basically that was the key position in this game, and that was the key place that offered you improvement. I just want to look at one other way that basically I think White exploited this fairly well, but I just want to play through one of the comp lines here. D takes e5, D takes e5, and then Queen takes d8, and then on King takes d8, Knight takes e5, and then on Knight takes d8, Bishop takes e5. The bishop taking e5 in this case is better because of the threat on c7, which Black will have to resolve. Overall, it's a good position. So basically on Knight c6, on King takes, Knight takes e5, threatening f7. On Knight takes, Bishop takes, threatening c7. But overall, after this point, White has a great position. The only time when it got close to equal was right at that moment where the rook's mobility got limited unnecessarily. But Black didn't play the tactically correct line there anyway. So overall, a solid win for White. And the one thing that I would advise just has to do with, in a time when you're moving the rook, make sure that you're on top of its mobility. Cool. No, of course. Thank you, guys. Sorry for, sorry, just, I got stuck in that. So let me look at your comments real quick, Sprintless. Yeah, absolutely. Please send the game, Sprintless, and we will get to it. I think if I confirmed that I already asked it, or let me just make sure, I'll take a look at the Discord for a second. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for sending the game, Sprintless. The game is in for May 7th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you very much for sending it. Perfect. Yeah, it's in for 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the 7th, which is Friday. It's great to have this much material ahead of time. I get to prepare better for it. Yeah, please keep sending it. Thank you very much for sending it, and yeah, look forward to the analysis. Also, if the time doesn't work well for you, Sprintless, you can always watch it video on demand. Or, I'm usually trying to be pretty cool about moving it to a night session versus a day session, or if you have a specific time that it might be better for you, I'll try to take that into account. It's not too hard for me to switch things around. I can definitely do it. So yeah. But for right now, Sprintless, it's due for 10 a.m. on May 7th. Thank you very much for sending it, and thank you for contributing to the stream. Thanks for being here. And yeah, thanks a lot, Rockets fan. Look forward to looking at your games soon too. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all everyone submitting like a lot of content, which makes it really easy to prepare and set up things. Not at the moment. So I'm gonna work this week and try to get it so that Twitch is integrated with YouTube. You can do that. I don't know how to do it, and I have a feeling that if I put a couple hours aside, I could figure out how to do it. But at this point, the games are just uploaded to Twitch. So they're on the Twitch page under recent broadcasts, and they're up there for 14 days. So yeah, feel free to access those on Twitch, and I think they should be good there. But YouTube, I'm gonna try to get going. I've started my YouTube account. I've started like the YouTube channel. I just need to figure out the integration process with Twitch and Twitch Studio. Then we'll be really good. I really want everything to be available forever. So instead of just 14 days. So that's why I think YouTube will be a good step forward there. Cool. Next game. This game is sent to us by. This game basically, is a solid game for White. Let's just play through it real quick. It's the Albin counter gambit, which is cool. We actually haven't had one in the Albin yet. No problem. How about 6:05 p.m. on the 7th, Sprintless? We can do that instead. Whatever, honestly, whatever works. Would 6:05 on the 7th work for you? Whatever's the most convenient. But yeah, so here e5, knight c3, bishop e6, pawn takes d5, or pawn takes e5, and yeah, we're looking at the Albin counter gambit. I really don't know this super well, but we will get to take a look at it. Okay, I'll put it down for the 7th on at 6:05 p.m. Thank you very much for sending over the game, Sprintless. Cool. So here, there's d takes e5, knight c3, and c takes d5, all playable moves. In terms of responses in the opening book, d takes e5 is by far the most popular. Basically here, d takes e5 is about 90% option. e3 is also played. C takes d5 is also played, but d takes e5 I think is opening theory's dictation of what the best move should be. Yeah, cool. Thank you for being here, Sprintless. Thank you very much for joining the stream, and feel free to send over any material that you'd like looked at in terms of these games. So d4 is about a 99% move. Cool. Here. Yeah, 99% d4. Knight f3, knight c6, g3, knight ge7, and this is basically a main line here. Bishop g2 looks like a 90% option as well, but this plays into a much more kind of reserved, relatively equal Albin counter gambit. White's initiative here is only about 0.8. White is fine after, basically white is fine after bishop g2, but with many other kind of straightforward developing options being acceptable here. Cool. Awesome. So I just wanted to really cement sort of the strength of, the strength of this opening structure. So e5 and d takes e5 is the most popular. On this d takes e5, White's showing almost a 1-point advantage, so I'd recommend d takes e5 against the Albin counter gambit. Black may play d4, which is somewhat of a restrictive position, but you can get more pieces attacking it with knight f3. D takes e5, d4, knight f3, knight c6, g3. White has a few different options here, either g3 or a3 or bnd2 are all kind of straightforward. Basically, other than a3, which prevents bishop to b4, these are straightforward developing moves for white. Cool. So, let's look at this. Knight c3, bishop e6 is an unusual move. This is not, basically this is a deviation from theory. With c takes d5 here, bishop takes d5 here, d takes e5 here, this e5 pawn is going to be retained, and this bishop is getting threatened either, basically directly by the queen and knight. So bishop's probably going to have to move, or c6 will have to be played, or potentially knight e7. But anyways, this was a bad deviation from theory for black. On knight c3, the correct move was c6. Transposing this into something a little bit more normal. Still, d takes e5 is the most popular response. d4, knight e4, queen a5, bishop d2, queen takes, knight g3. I guess this is this is basically a position in which the queen is probably overextended. White has good development, and everything is good here. But anyways, the game sort of continues with white developing normally and black trying to develop as normally as he can. Actually, black's development probably isn't that bad here. He can get his bishops out and knights out fairly easily. And with knight to g3, bishop f5 is no longer available, but the bishop will probably still be able to play to e6. That's probably now the most natural square for the bishop. But overall, weird opening. Albin counter gambit. I want to keep looking at the Albin counter gambit, but I also want to get this game through. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the rest of this. The e pawn looks somewhat isolated, but looks difficult for black to attack without a pawn. And white's up a piece. So how much? Basically, this is looking at this is basically looking like a significantly better position for white. I don't know if it ever gets close here, but yeah, losing the rook here I guess makes it close. So great. It's been a while since we've taken a look at an endgame. This basically looks like this is getting evaluated as equal, but let's look at kind of the themes for white in this endgame. This should be interesting. F4, rook c3, h5, and here, yeah, b6 looks like a blunder that's going to allow rook takes h5. And overall here, it looks about equal. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of wondering, how should white play this? My guess is probably that it's really drawish. There's not really much. So the position where it first, where it first turns into a rook and pawn versus rook and pawn endgame is here. This is interesting. So I don't know. Rook a5 looks playable. B5 and then b6 look playable. But it's hard to know how white should advance this. I mean, the engine's evaluating as a draw, so that's probably the most key part of this. But in any case, b5, b6, and white is good, I think. White's going to be able to probably, pick off one of these pawns, and I think things should be relatively good. Anyways, rook a5, king b6, f4, and things, basically the position's simplified. Black's pawn structure on the c file or on the f file is pretty bad. This was an error for black. The winning move here, king takes f4, is really an error here. If the rook plays to b5, this basically gets into a winning type position. Rook to c8, b7, rook to b8, king takes f4, and I think everything's good. Nothing too surprising there, yeah, basically a win for white. Awesome. Let's keep looking. d4, d5. Pawn takes e5, bishop b4. This is just unusual. I don't really know anything, basically going on here. Pawn takes d5. And here, I don't know. I mean, I guess I would just say white is better. White's gained a piece. Here, e4 was an error. If knight b takes d5 or d4, then white is still winning, but not losing a piece. The correct solution here, I guess, yeah, was just like bishop to c3. Knight c6 is really a blunder. I don't understand why black would play that. Knight takes b4, I guess, is fine. White may have this check, queen a4, but then you can play knight to c6, and everything's good for white. Anyways, things continue. And white ends up a rook and ends up in a drawn endgame position. Pretty wild game, to be honest. d4, d5, pawn takes e5, pawn takes, and I think everything's pretty much all right. Threats on d5. And yeah, I mean, basically, black deviated pretty early from an opening, and not really much after that. Hey, thank you very much, Leaf. We went over your game already. It was, I think, the first game that we went over. But thank you very much for sending it, and please keep sending games in the future. So yeah, so e5 here. I think there's better options like d takes. Basically playing the opening move as opposed to knight c3 offers white better chances. Here I would look at d takes e5, d4, knight f3, knight c6, g3. This is how the Albin counter gambit is played. The main move, the 90% move is d takes e5. I would advise white to play d takes e5 in the future. The main response to that is d4, which is a move that sort of flattens your position. But then you can just play kind of normal developing moves. Knight f3 threatening to take d4. Black defends it, but just basically focus on normal development. I like bishop f4 here, even though it's not really an opening line. G3 is the recommended opening line. Knight ge7, bishop g2, knight g6, castles, and basically, this situation is good for white. White's in a pretty good place here. Bishop e7, I think, is the right idea, and yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, Leaf. I take online classes as well. I just finished one myself, and started another one. Yeah, so here basically, this is pretty interesting. I don't know, maybe bishop f4 here. If you really want to be materialistic about it, But knight g takes e5, and I still think white has a better, has the initiative here. Knight takes, and this bishop on g2 threatening this a8 diagonal is pretty strong. Let's keep looking. d4, d5, c4, e5, pawn takes pawn, d4, knight f3, knight c6, and then either a3, bishop f4, or knight d2. G3 seemed to work out pretty well. Other opportunities, A3, knight G7, B4, knight G6, but basically just a relatively normal game for white. D takes E5 doesn't seem to create any major tactical issues for white. I think basically white is fine, and everything I think is good. D4, knight F3, knight C6, G3. No issues here. Pretty straightforward advancement for white, and nothing, nothing really, too surprising about this. D4 can be a little bit restrictive, but you have both opportunities to clear it off. You have opportunities to undermine it with E3. Bishop takes E3, but overall, white's in a good place. Bishop E6, Bn D2, Queen D7, Bishop G2, and yeah, white is. I think white's in a pretty solid place. Maybe b3 and then bishop to b2. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, FIFA boy. Thank you very much for stopping by. So bishop to g2 and white's in a good place. Castles, h5, h4. Nothing really too dangerous. Basically, just have to play chess. So reinforcing the main point of this opening, since I think this was not the best line for white. An improvement was e5, d takes e5, d4, knight f3, and white is in a good place. Knight c6, g3, a3, or bn d2. All of those are good options for white. Defending straightforwardly and putting threats on d4. You probably will have to give back the e5 pawn at some point, but even if you give it back, you will basically be in a good general position. I'm sort of curious about bishop f4 because that's the line that I would be tempted to play. I think bishop f4 should be fine too, and it makes more sense from a developmental perspective since it gets the bishop out before the knight. But yeah, eventually the e5 pawn still has to be given back, but white actually has a positional advantage. So overall, white can accept the gambit and then give it back with a positional edge, as one is supposed to do with a gambit. Knight gx e5, knight x e5, knight x e5, and now with queen f5, these pieces are getting forked. Everything is good. So, anyways, very interesting. I think that's the first game that we've looked at out of the Albin counter gambit, and on to the next one. This one is from Myriad. Myriad 58. He's playing black here, and we will look. I guess I would say with Fianchetto setups, it's sort of it basically depends on the rest of the position. In a modern type position, that's pretty fine. Fianchetto setup with G3, G6, or depending on who's playing it. So G6 generally, bishop G7. That becomes black's most valuable piece, and paired with a good pawn break at the same time, can be a pretty good position for black. It really depends. It's a good question, Leaf, but nothing particularly insightful about my analysis. It's just basically a way that you can develop the bishop effectively, and basically it's a good diagonal. Fianchetto is sort of a good way to play it, and depending on the position, it can be the appropriate thing to do. Fianchetto setups on b3 for white in the Italian situation, or b3 bishop to b2, tend to not be so strong. So it's a very complicated question, Leaf, and I hope my analysis is reasonably good. The main point there is just don't don't play anything unnatural trying to achieve a Fianchetto setup, but just sort of decide when, whether it's fitting for the opening and the position that you're playing in. Very broad question. Thank you very much for the leaf, for that leaf. Cool. So anyways, let's keep going. Let's take the position as black. This is Myriad's game. E4, D5, pawn takes D5, queen D5, knight F3. And this is an interesting Scandinavian defense. Basically, this is not the usual Scandinavian fence in that it leaves the queen on D5 unchallenged. It's sort of a very, it's kind of a lazy way to play this. It's basically not, it doesn't really make sense to be playing knight F3. You do want to develop with tempo here. So developing without tempo doesn't really make a whole lot of sense here. Bishop G4, Bishop E2, Knight C6, H3, Bishop H5, Knight C3, and then Queen D7. Basically White's looking good here. This is relatively good for. This is actually relatively good for Black. Generally, the Black strength here tends to basically be taking this to the middle game tends to be stronger for Black. With the basically with the Scandinavian, the eval is generally much worse actually for Black than this. Plus 0.43, not really that bad, not really that different from equality. And considering that with the Scandinavian you're getting some level of practical compensation anyways, I basically like Black's position here. So castles queenside, b4, and then either f5 or knight f6 or bishop takes f3. But basically really very close to equality. I don't know if knight takes b4 can be played. That looks like a pretty dangerous tactical possibility, but it is in this opening book. So I guess I'm sort of going to look at the opening book. Sometimes in the Scandinavian, the lines aren't particularly helpful. It doesn't really help that much to evaluate the computer lines in the opening because they're always very favorable to White. The fact that this one is not extremely favorable to White sort of implies that that White is getting kind of a mediocre position. This knight c3 does not really, or this initial knight f3 unchallenging to the queen doesn't really advance White's position in any way. It's just sort of, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Not that great an idea. And it'll definitely lose. It basically, it'll end up losing a lot of time to Black, who's going to play this, much more aggressively and with much better straightforward development. Anyways, b4, knight takes b4, rook b1, and then e6. Knight c6 was the book move here, but e6 looks fine to me. I don't see any problems there. Now it's sort of an interesting kind of asymmetrical position. This b1 rook has some attacking chances for White, but Black has better development, and it looks like he's going to start launching an attack on the White king side. It's interesting. Anyways, nothing too exciting there. Knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2. And yeah, now White's, this should, I think as a general trend, these positions overestimate how strong, White is in the Scandinavian. So 0.6 is really, having played the Scandinavian, I just know that 0.6 is not as solid for White as it might appear in other, or might be consistent with in other positions. It's just not, partially because Black doesn't get his central pawns out early. It just ends up being a more favorable, eval for White than I think it often ends up being. You can do an analysis of the Scandinavian, and it'll just slowly go from White's big advantage to something much more towards equality, playing just totally normal moves. Anyways, castles, b4, knight takes b4. Knight takes b4 is kind of aggressive. I mean, opening the b file for the rook probably isn't the best idea, but it is within the opening book, and here, Black I think is just fine. An alternative here, this line, bishop takes f3, knight d4, a4, e6. Yeah, everything's fine. I mean, it's basically, this is an early queenside attack for white, but with straightforward development and potentially bishop takes b4, a5, black's got a pretty good position. Cool. So let's keep going. Knight f3, bishop g4, but no challenges to the queen until this knight c3. Queen d7 is interesting. It's just not what I would look at. I would play queen d6 here. Queen d6 is a little bit worse because, basically it doesn't have c6 played behind it. Frequently, basically in the Scandinavian, the e4, d5, pawn takes, queen takes, bishop g4, bishop e2, and then, going back in this line, queen takes d5, knight c3, queen d6, and then c6. Here, black's basically in an okay place. White is not, worse here. The only move that black can really do the only threat that white can really make immediately is knight to b5, and this is sort of a misplacement. What ends up happening here generally is something like knight to f3 and then c6, defending against b5, and basically black's just fine. No problems for black here. This is a good opening that I can think of at least a few grandmasters have tried in practice. Anyways, let's go back to the game. Black castles queenside very early, which is unusual, and then b4 is played early, partially just to start an attack on the black queen side. Anyways, nothing really here. Tactical defense, I guess. Knight e8 is a blunder. Let's figure out why. After knight e8, knight e5 is definitely a good outpost, but it was a good outpost either way, so the preferred move here was bishop to d6, preventing that knight to e5 outpost. It's kind of impressive. Is that really 5 whole points on the idea that that knight is going to be outposted there? Alright. Anyways. Bishop to e5 and then rook to c1. Interesting. Yeah, cool. So e4, d5, queen takes, and just basically, where was black's best opportunity here? Knight to c6, knight to e4, f5, knight g3. This looks fine for white. And then black's better, I guess. Bishop takes b7 was not really the best idea. This defensive battery for black, knight a5 and knight to b7, holds up excellently. This really, this is no, this basically is no problem at all for black. There's, it basically, I'm a little bit surprised that black chose to let this. Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for following, Angel. I appreciate it. Thank you. So yeah, so knight d6, knight takes bishop takes b7, knight takes b7. Things are fine. No problems here. Basically this was kind of a squandered opportunity for white. Leading to equality out of a +7 eval was silly, not a good idea. And here, I don't know. I guess there's not really much, not much white can do. What was the better? Let's take a look at what the better method for white to break in here was. Knight takes, knight c3, which is fine. Knight c6 here. Sorry. Knight takes, queen b7. Yeah, everything's fine. I think black is just. Yeah, black just seems to be stronger. I don't think there's a way to break in with this method. Let's take a look from here. Here, I think white really makes a serious misstep, so I'm kind of curious to see what the engine comes up with in terms of analysis. Knight c4 looks very challenging immediately. This a5 knight is holding the b7 pawn down. So I'm thinking like knight takes. I mean, this is actually really tricky. Um, Maybe knight to d6. No, well, I mean, it's actually really just bad for black. You know, it's +5 for white and looks like it. How do you hold b7 here? It's not super clear to me. Um, Queen e7, bishop a6, knight d6 looks fine. But knight c4 challenging this a5 knight, I think, is a much better play. Knight takes c4 and then c6 maybe. But overall, I think it's pretty good for black. Anyways, interesting. Let's just go through this game. It's a very tactical game, which I don't particularly like spending a ton of time on the streams. But yeah, overall, it looks pretty good for black. Out of what was very good for white. Too much tactical play to be, you know, a lot of tactical play to be honest. In terms of sidestepping a lot of this stuff, I'm just going to go back to where the opening breaks were. Castling queenside introduced a lot of potential issues. I think castling queenside in general is probably fine. In fact, the engine is evaluating it as best. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of castling queenside here. I think after bishop g6 or e6, black's in a pretty good, you know, basically black's in a pretty good place. Castling kingside seems much more intuitive, and it leads to a lot less problems with these kinds of aggressive attacks. You know, that said, it is one of the opening lines. Let's just look. It's the second most popular opening line, relatively deep in, so I don't know, that's a small sample size. But I play like e6, knight f6, bishop d6, and just, you know, don't worry about any of this stuff. It's knight f6, e6, bishop d6, castle kingside. And then you don't have to deal with any of this, you know, any of this, you know, weak, you know, relatively weakening pawn moves, attacks with pawns on, you know, attacks with pawns on the black queen side. Black is fine. Knight f6, d3, castles, bishop f4, e6, and I think, yeah, overall here, you know, black is fine. I think the eval is at about you know, 0.5. But overall, you know, I don't really see too many problems with this position. I'd prefer to be castled. Kingside, but overall here this looks just fine. No issues. Okay, castles. B4, knight takes, rook b1, and yeah, overall here, you know, relative equality. Things really start to go wrong for black when this attack starts coming in. There's a huge difference between bishop d6 and knight to e8 here. You know, it's for tactical reasons, so I guess we can play through them. But generally here, bishop to d6 is better. I don't know. I mean, this is a big positional weakness. Allowing knight to e5 is really difficult in terms of making, you know, basically, it's really difficult in terms of finding things for black to do after knight to e5. So, knight e8 instead, knight to d5, queen e7, bishop a6, and overall here, now things are fine. You know, how could white have done this better? c4 was considered to be better than bishop to a6. I think just sort of a slow pressing attack of white on the white queen side is probably the best idea. C4, C5, C6 looks fine, and let's, you know, keep going. Knight takes, knight C3. Overall here, I think it looks pretty solid. Just really tactically complicated. The position I'm just interested in looking at is what was better for white. You know, what makes this a +9 position? And I really hope that it's something relatively clear, because you know, with a +9 eval, it really should be. King b8, queen takes a5, b6. I mean, this is a long tactical string of moves. You know, a human would have much more trouble getting this right than the computer does. Uh, okay, I sort of see we're starting to get into the situation where there's going to be some mating threats on the king, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is sort of getting biased by Black's extremely limited mobility. I think in terms of practical compensation, Black is basically Black's basically going to be fine. Black has a much better chance of being fine than the engine is evaluating. Knight to c6, knight takes, queen takes b7, and nothing there. Just basically a slightly better position for Black, and I don't know. Looks fine. Knight takes maybe. King, yeah, knight e3 looks like it simplifies. Yeah, let's look at what happened here. This is another tactical complexity. Rook to d8 basically holds this file. Rook takes d8, knight takes d8, things are fine. And on the other side, king f5 leads to knight e3, king g6, and then knight takes f7, king takes f7. Here Black is better. So overall, good stuff. Rook d7, knight e7, and overall, I don't know. I guess not a lot there. Rook c8 maybe. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Cool. Yeah, so very tactically complicated position, a lot of volatility. Let's just look at this game. A lot of volatility in a really complicated position. In terms of improving this game for Black, first I'd point towards tactical play. I can improve White's game a lot better. Knight f3 doesn't make much sense in the Sicilian. No, I'm actually just gonna configure one this week. Thank you for asking, Leaf. My goal is to basically make it so all of the lessons are automatically uploaded to a YouTube channel. But yeah, nothing at this point. Hoping to get that all configured this week, and then once these lessons can go up forever, that's going to be way better. 14 days is not my goal. My goal here is unlimited free chess content for everyone, free instructional content so everyone can access it, and having a YouTube channel where the videos are up indefinitely is much better than having a Twitch channel where the videos are only available for 14 days. I'm hoping this instruction is helpful to everyone, not just the people who are looking at the games, but basically I want everything up forever, and I want coaching to be completely free. It's really my goal. Anyways, nothing particularly, I guess I would say there aren't huge improvements outside of just accuracy of tactical play. There's just a lot of weird moves in this opening. Knight takes b4 is pretty aggressive, but it's in the opening book. Improvements for Black, I guess I would say this was a little bit slow response to this queenside attack, maybe. H6 doesn't really do much. This bishop threatening this pin is really pretty unimportant here. I might start allocating resources to this queen to b, basically queen to b3 attack on b7. I guess, one thing just from a strategic perspective. So, I'm not a fan of castling queenside in the Scandinavian, largely because this type of thing can happen. So I guess my biggest takeaway from this game, other than just, tactical studies extremely important and accurate tactics are, the deciding factor in most club level games. that is pretty pretty much my biggest takeaway. Just basically, such a high percentage of games are determined by tactical, play at the club level. That you should really be studying tactics an hour a day if you're hoping to improve. Like an hour a day for a month would work well. So that's really the biggest decider of this particular game. When you see a game report that's this volatile, the answer is always tactics. Game reports like this mean a very tactical game with some inaccuracy. Yeah, Jack Mack, exactly. Tactics, bam. I love the emote, and that emote is very relevant in this case. That I think is pretty good. That bishop takes e5 idea, but the improvement that I would make for black here, other than really study tactics so you can play more accurately than your opponent in a tactically complicated situation. The only advice I would give is consider a line of the Scandinavian where you aren't castling queenside. If you're castling kingside, these threats really can't happen. Basically white is castled kingside, so he's sort of free to move like a4, b4, and aggressively attack on the queenside. And if you're over there, then he can, throw the whole thing at you and basically aim for a win over there. If you castle kingside, his attacking moves are going to have to be a lot more double-edged. You can't really pawn storm without hurting your own king safety. When I played the Scandinavian, I always castled kingside. My finding was that was almost always better. But that is the improvement that I would offer in this case. Knight f6, e6, and bishop to d6. The engine evaluates castling queenside is fine, so I guess I don't want to. I mean, it's playable, it's in the engine as a good move, but I think just for practical considerations, you'll avoid a lot of these really dangerous queenside attacks if you castle kingside. That's why I would propose that you do that. But anyways, that's my suggestion. Try to make it so that you castle a little later and on the king side in the Scandinavian, and I think you'll be in pretty good shape. Anyways, that's that, and on to the next thing. Thank you very much for sending the game, yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, Myriad. I think we have another one from you in the relatively near future. Please send more. My main advice coming out of that game is that tactics are extremely important. I always say that, but I also think here, consider a Scandinavian line where you're castling kingside instead of queenside. I think that's better for you. Anyways, that's my take on that game. It became very tactical and tactical. I can't really teach tactical accuracy. That's just homework that you have to do on your own. Anyways, next one, Kathleen playing as white. Thank you very much for sending this game, Kathleen. Yeah, let's look. Here we go. Kathleen is playing white here against the French. I haven't seen this game, and I'm just going to play through it quickly. Okay. Okay, cool. Good save. Good work. Yeah, nice job drawing this one, Kathleen. Yeah, so I'm gonna start off with something that I think is like pretty important. The main theory of the French is if white can hold on to this d4 and e5 pawn, then white is better. If white can maintain those two pawns. Black will play many moves like f6 or c5, trying to undermine them. But if black is unsuccessful, then there's basically white will win if he can maintain d4 and e5. Many of black's moves in the French are to try to disrupt these two pawns. If black can basically clear off one or two of the pawns, he's either going to be equal or better. So you basically never want to do anything as white to disrupt this d4 e5 pawn structure. So even if this pawn appears to be hanging, this is bad from a theoretical perspective. There's just very few lines where it's correct to play d takes c5. because from a fundamental standpoint, the French is based on white being able to retain this d4, e5 pawns. By playing d takes c5, you're sort of doomed to equality here. So yeah, other moves here, knight a3 is surprisingly playable here. It's the #1 move. Bishop to d3, a3. It's really your choice. But there's a great draw up in Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine on this topic, and it basically has to do with various pawn structures in the French defense. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, knight f3, knight e7, but pawn takes c5 is not accurate. So I wouldn't play that. The king looks like it's moving a little bit inefficiently here. I'm sort of wondering, basically, d takes c5 is normally just view as a really kind of rough move for the white in the French. But I think you can hold this e5 pawn, and I think everything's pretty much good here. King e7, and yeah, f5 maybe, f5, pawn takes f5, pawn takes f5 maybe. But basically white is good. There's not really much much going on here. I'm looking at this position. By the time g4 gets played, there's some real issues for white. But let's take a look. Knight g6, and then g5 or f5 potentially. Rook f1 holds this pawn, and moves like f5 I think are good for white. Maybe knight e7, f5, something. But the position's really shifted towards black. The engine here is proposing rook ec8. Rook ec8 attacks this knight. The knight is pinned, and on the knight moving. So here, say rook. Basically here the engine just gives up the c3 pawn entirely. But let's say the knight moves, so the knight plays to e2. Black can play g5, but I was thinking more about black playing d5 here. This looks, or d4 here. This looks like it puts a lot of pressure on this rook on c1. But I don't know. Interesting. Let's go back. Okay. So this opening's going fine. D takes c5 is just a positional mistake. There may be opening books that recommend it, but I don't think that it's thematically appropriate for the French. D takes c5 is not that good an idea. Bishop e3, queen takes e3, bishop b5. Everything's here everything's looking okay for white, but white's center is still diminished. I don't really like the general I don't like the general idea. E5 could probably be undermined. Moves like f6, pawn takes f6 could eliminate that pawn, or basically eliminate white's center entirely. You'd have to set it up for a move or two first, but castles f6, castles bishop d7 f6, and black is just fine. Black, I think, loses some tempo here, bouncing that king around. I don't think that was super helpful. He should probably just play king e7 immediately. But in terms of improving, king f8, b4. Yeah, I think it's pretty much, I think knight takes c6 was an understandable error. Knight takes c6, rook takes c6 leads to an open file. But I do understand your goal of trading off the worse minor piece for the better minor piece here. That makes sense to me. I'm thinking something along the lines of like f5 could be good. But overall, I think white is basically fine. The engine's proposing a kingside attack, g4, followed by f5, and then probably king h1, rook g1, and pressure with the pawns on the king side. I like that. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Leaf. I got my water right here. Thanks. Um, Thank you for saying that. Good reminder. So yeah, G4 F5 looks pretty good, and yeah, overall, knight takes C6 I think was pretty weak. It was the kind of a it makes sense as an intuitive idea, but this bishop's not particularly doing that much on that diagonal, whereas this knight is actually holding a good amount of relevant squares. F5 probably is the best play for white, but G4, G4 F5, pawn takes F5 provides a more complete attack. I think this is good. So yeah, let's just go through it. King F8, kind of basically, these moves, King F8 followed by King E7 doesn't make much sense. And then white can sort of seize the initiative by launching an early kingside attack. Basically, the plan here is to launch a kingside attack. That's my suggestion here, and I think the way that white improves this game. D takes C5. I'm gonna continue to kind of harp on as anti-thematic in the French, and here, there's not really much. There's not much for white to worry about. I think it just comes down to making this attack with F4, F5, and pawn threats on E6. Yeah, I think white can just sort of safely push the pawns here. Once this sort of turns into a queenside thing, and once this, I think this, just in the abstract, trading this knight on D4 for the C6 bishop is probably not a wise idea. But if you do it, basically if you don't diminish white's center here and just start attacking the king side, I think that's going to be the best course of action for you. Even A3 is just kind of a slightly unnecessary move. G4, F5, pawn takes F5, king H1, rook to G1, and you're in a good place. So that's what I would vote for here. F5, pawn takes F5, and nothing. So cool, interesting. So yeah, too many moves spent on this on this queen side here. B4 I can sort of get my head around as a move. Probably it's probably already better to start attacking. The engine evaluates it. It's already better to start attacking on the king side. But looking at this position, even though it is double-edged, there's few enough pieces that black can really exploit you attacking on the king side. This leads me to believe that the attacking on the king side is really the wisest move. Overall, very interesting. E4, E6, and pawn takes C5 being kind of the only anti-thematic move. White's basically fine after all these exchanges. And then, the engine is encouraging you, and I'm encouraging you, keep the pieces on the board, launch an attack, and I don't think black can really successfully respond to this pawn storm. G4, F5, pawn takes F5, and puts white in a pretty good place, and black in a pretty dangerous one. So anyways, very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Leaf. I hope it's helpful. Mainly the goal here is just, the goal is really to just make chess instruction completely free. It will be free. At the end of the day, I hope that someone will, stronger than me will be giving free lessons in the same way that I am now. But it's going to happen. So I'm really excited that I get to work on this early, and I'm really excited that you're here watching this early. Together we can basically make it so that the chess lessons are free and available to everyone worldwide. That's the goal. I'm not saying that that's something that I'll do successfully, but it's something that someone will do successfully, and my hope is that I can help contribute to that larger project. It really can be done, and that makes me really happy. So anyways. Start attacking hard on the king side here, and white will secure a better position. I would just slow down on the fundamentals behind exchanging this knight for this bishop. Yes, I understand that it's a the worse knight is weaker than the bishop as a minor piece, but yeah, I think, this knight could potentially be useful for an attack. But more than that, I just think that in terms of comparing the values of these two pieces, this knight is outposted in a very useful way. This bishop is outposted in a pretty unuseful way. So exchanging this knight for this, exchanging this knight for this bishop is not really the best use of it. It's better to save this knight for a kingside attack started by f4, f5. Pawn takes f5, and I think everything's good. Anyways, the game continues, and basically empties a lot. Basically f5 ends up being played, and ultimately, yeah, nothing. Nothing really too complicated. Black is winning and up material. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this endgame. You have a great tactic at the end. I just want to show that off for a second because I think it really was a strong idea. It was king to g. Rook takes h5 here, and then with king to g6. So basically, the eval is a -4, and then with rook takes h5 here, it goes to equals. King to g6 draws. I think rook to g5 was best, but still here. King takes, and I'm pretty sure this is a draw. Yeah, it's a draw. King takes h6, and if the rook goes anywhere else, then you play rook takes. Play rook takes f5, and then this was the cool tactical closing. Rook takes f4, king takes f4, king takes, king f3, and everything's cleared off, and it's a draw. So yeah, overall, good draw for white, and nicely done. Thank you very much for the game. Let's take a look at one more. So this is Till Daniel Noah's game. I hope you're around for this. We rescheduled it from a morning game to an evening game, and we're doing it now. If you're not here, it'll be a video on demand, and I'll remind you in the Discord. So here, cool, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jack Mac. Yeah, sorry. Sometimes I forget people's Twitch names versus their Twitch names versus their Discord names. But cool, let's go through this. So Vienna game, interesting. Cool. So here we keep doing this, and it's one of those things that we figured out relatively early on in this stream. This f4, is the Falkbeer Gambit. And we've established that there's only one move that's good against the Falkbeer Gambit, and they often don't play it. Yeah, no worries. No worries, Kathleen. I hope that was helpful. Your game was really interesting, Kathleen. I think basically it was, with Kathleen, it was basically, with Kathleen's game, it was basically, I thought that the d takes c5 pawn was, generally anti-thematic in French opening games. It's rare that you can play d takes c5 and not have that basically neutralize your center and have it not lead to equality. And then the other part of that game, basically I thought that was sort of anti-thematic, and then yeah, and then there was definitely some middle game volatility with tactics. Anyways, f4. Pawn takes f4 is not the solution. The correct solution to f4 is d5. D5, pawn takes e5, knight takes e4, knight f3. This is good for white and generally good. So here white is basically sorry. So f4, d5, or basically f4. So this is the situation. I was just going through the correct gambit. D5 is the only playable move against the Falkbeer Gambit. We've looked through this a number of times, and it's one of my takeaways from that position. With that, white is showing a slight minus, but it's basically equal. F takes e5, knight takes e4, and then either knight f3 or queen f3, or there's a few options for white. But basically, this plays out as a relatively normal game, and there's not really too many issues for white. It's a little bit worse. But this is black's best response. Every other response to the Falkbeer Gambit, other than d5, leads to a pretty solid minus. Takes f4 is an inaccuracy. I mean, it basically gives white a one-pawn advantage out of the opening. Solid. So if the gambit is accepted, that's almost guaranteed bad for black. Let's keep going on this game. e5 is correct, knight g8 is correct, knight f3 is correct, d6 is correct, d4. And then bishop g4 is the first move that isn't the main line here. Here, knight c6 is the main line. Something like d5 probably gets played. Bishop takes f4, gets back the pawn, okay. And here, you know, it's basically traded into a situation where white certainly has the initiative. Yeah, no, totally, Jack. But honestly, in this opening, we've looked at it a good number of times. Everything is bad for black except for d5, and black often doesn't play d5 here. You know, frequently it's not d5. You know, this book has black playing d5 90% of the time, but it seems like in practice, like it seems like black plays d5 like 50% of the time. You know, often not playing it. So f4 here, d5, f takes e5, knight takes e4, knight f3, and basically white's in good shape. Maybe, yeah, maybe, but it does make sense for you to keep playing it where you are. No problems there. So here, you know, white's better. Pretty much, you know, just straightforward development here, and white will get a good position. d4, bishop g4 is inaccurate, but not terrible. Just keep developing as white, and you've got a big spatial advantage. Black has no center, by the way. No pawns on either the e file or the d file, and you're in a good place. Queen takes, knight takes, c3, and yeah. I think white's just solid. You can keep playing through this, but yeah, okay. So bishop takes c7. I don't think was the right move. Everything else here I've liked. I think basically you've developed in a normal way, and if you continue to develop in a normal way, castles queenside, rook f1. You know, maybe castles kingside just because it defends you know, this knight. You know, it does sort of suck that you have to give back the b7 pawn, but that's fine too. I guess I would say castles here, and your knight's not, you know, bishop takes knight is not going to be that great. It's not going to double the pawns if that's played, but I don't think you can hold on to the b7 pawn here, unfortunately. Yeah, no. So bishop takes c7, I think, was the issue. Bishop takes c7 and blacks up significantly. Just a full piece. Oh, this is wild. Okay, so then bishop takes f4 is played for pretty much favors white. And then you end up winning. But let's go back here a little bit. E4, E5, and then you're already good after pawn takes f4. Just develop normally, and everything will be fine in this opening. The pawn on b7 can't be you know, can't be saved. So castle queenside or castle kingside, and you're good. And then black hangs this piece back. And then you should be able to draw all this, and now I think you're all right. Yeah, interesting, Jack. Interesting game. Very tactical. So yeah. So, you know, at the end of the day, I lead everyone to tactics because I know that's one thing that you know, I really can't teach. That's just something you have to do, all the tactical puzzles. You have to put the time in there, and once you do, you really will be in good shape. There are many points in this game where there was volatility. You know, there's multiple swings of more than 5 points, and the main point of tactics is so that you can capitalize on those. Once you do your tactics training, you know, start with an hour a day for a month, and then, you know, keep working from there. You know, you'll be able to see a lot more of these opportunities. You know, swings of 5 points should end the game, and with good tactical vision, they will end the game. So that's my main takeaway here. You know, I'm just going to steer you to the same resources that everyone is talking about. Basically, this you know, chess.com puzzle battle, chess.com puzzle rush, and basically you know, good tactical resources so that you can learn quickly. You know, you've got in a lead out of this opening. I wouldn't talk you out of this opening, especially if you're getting moves other than d5 against it. The refutation is d5. Everything else is good for white. We've looked at this before, and it continues to be true. So you know, when you're walking out of the opening with 2 points, I have no complaints. I just think it's really about tactics. Bishop takes c7 reflects something, I think, you know, I think it's definitely a move worth avoiding. Just hung a piece. I think with sufficient tactical training, you won't be hanging pieces to one move combinations anymore. You'll see them a lot better. But that's really where this game was decided. I think the opening is fine. You can stick with it. You can definitely stick with it as long as people aren't playing d5 against it. And overall, you're in a good place. You know you have a very clear and straightforward path forward. Just continue to play the best tactical moves and do sufficient tactical training so that you can you can win against opponents who are playing inferior tactical moves. Not super complicated, to be honest. Just a lot of time you know, spent on that. Cool. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Well, no, I mean, I think as long as you continue to push on that, you know, Jack, it's as long as you can basically make it so that your situation is, you know, one where your opponent is making volatile moves. Tactical study is going to put you ahead in those types of positions. Strongly agree with that general concept. For Puzzle Rush, I guess, you know, to be honest, Kathleen, when I was doing Puzzle Rush, I think only 5-minute was available. I don't even think 3-minute Puzzle Rush was available. So I guess what I would say about Puzzle Rush is if you just play, if you know, it doesn't really matter, to be honest, 3-minute or 5-minute. 5-minute probably takes you to the point where you, you know, where you are seeing more complicated tactics because you can get more in 5 minutes. This, yeah, no, but basically, chess.com Puzzle Rush, I've done a lot less of recently. When I was doing it, it was only the 5-minute option. It's much more important that you actually just spend the time doing it, Kathleen, than, you know, than specifically what you do. You know, you want to be at the point where you're seeing thousands of tactics. It's really about volume, and you know, go back and do the ones you know, that you miss so that the correct position imprints. But definitely be sure to spend sufficient time on tactics. I think, you know, prior to, or, you know, below 2000, you know, below a 2000 rating, tactics are by far, you know, the most valuable thing. Most games under 2000 are decided by tactical strength. Yeah, no problem. No, I think 3 minutes is fine. Really, just spend a lot of time on it. You know, probably the quicker, the easier the puzzles. You know, probably the more they're helpful at making you careful, and the more you know, and versus basically the more that they'll make you calculate. So, like, if you're doing more you know, if you're doing 1500 rated tactical puzzles, you know, those are mostly 1 or 2 move tactics. Those are super good so that you get more careful and that you don't accidentally miss 1 or 2 move tactics in a game. In a 5-minute game, or like 5-minute Puzzle Rush, and when you're doing like 2100 level tactics, those were, you know, mates in 3, wins in 3, you know, positional improvements. Those are way more subtle. So those are good for calculating and for longer games. But both are skills that I think are super helpful to have, and super helpful to have as much of as you possibly can. Both the you know, the tactics where you have to be careful, and the tactics where you have to calculate. And the higher level tactics are better for calculation, the shorter ones are better for just attention. But both are skills that you want to have, particularly at fast time controls. So that's sort of my advice on that. Yeah, and I think Jack's position is also pretty similar to that. It's really just about tactics until you get to about 2000. You know, you will have to go back at 2000 and you know, get a better understanding of the position. Nah, it's really about with opening theory. I think it's really about when people have suggested it. Someone gave me 6 openings to look at. Like the idea, I gave them 6 slots, one in the morning and one in the evening for 3 consecutive days. And if anyone else has any more recommendations on openings that they'd like to see, I would really like to see them. I think it's really helpful for my opening understanding. So it's up for you, or it's up to you. It's basically, that's basically the idea that I have. I think basically, having an opening theory section as opposed to a game review section could be helpful to the stream. And overall, just keep sending material. Doesn't have to be games. Could be opening theory. Could be endgame theory. And I learn a lot from it too, to be honest. So whatever you want to send is very helpful for the stream. So I don't have any organized way of doing it. I just give slots as they're available, Leaf. Interesting question. Feel free to just send me whatever you want, and I'll put it at a time that is available. Thank you very much for asking, Leaf. Thank you all for being here. In terms of better reviews, I guess I would say, things that are, I would say that's probably true, Jack. The less tactical ones, I have the more ability to add value to. The issue with tactical games is I'm happy to go over them and they show some cool stuff sometimes. But the thing about tactical games is basically that grandmasters are worse than the computer at them. The computer has basically solved tactics. So as important as they are for you to learn, they're not really that important from a theoretical perspective in terms of analysis, just because the engine can do all the tactics. No human can improve on what even the really basic engines like the chess.com engine can do. The chess.com engine beats every single human on Earth at tactics. So in terms of reviewing a game, I'm not sure I can add that much. For a tactical game, you can go through and look at with an engine, and I think that will do 95% of what I can do in terms of teaching. The situations that I think I can add the most value are the ones that are focused on opening positions, where I can kind of point towards openings that I've seen. More tactics in general. I think in terms of improvement, tactics are by far the most important thing under a 2000 level. But in terms of analysis, I just can't add much there. The computer is better than every single person at tactics. Basically in a tactical game, I can try to come up with better moves, but if I really want to come up with the best better moves, I just look at the engine line. And that's something that you can do at home, and that's not really any value that I'm adding. What I can do in terms of teaching is basically I can point towards strategies or opening type heuristics that are basically better at basically those are the areas where I can help to improve things. Tactics, I can say, yeah, this is better than that, but the engine could have said exactly the same thing. Basically, I can help less with calculation because the computer beats every single person on calculation, and help more with explanation. Explanation is where a coach can add value. Just tactical positions, a human's relatively worthless relative to the engine. I could definitely try that, Jack. Sure. That's an interesting idea and not one that I've thought of. The engine will solve the best move in every situation. You can look at the places where the engine, sees a big change in its assessment, and you can find the tactical mistake that would have provided an improvement or an opportunity. But the main point there is, just don't send whatever you want. Don't be afraid to send anything. I'm always really happy to see whatever games people will send in. I can look at the most instructive part of any game, and every game has instructive aspects to it. Even if it's just learning the Albin counter gambit, every game has ability to teach. Please send as many games as you can. It's really helpful, and it improves my analysis when there's lots of games and I can work ahead and do some prep. But yeah, overall, don't be afraid to send anything. Please send whatever you want, and that's it's all appreciated by me. You could send anything, any game to me, and I would appreciate it because it's all helpful in contributing to the stream in some way. Yeah, but yeah. Anyways, tactical games in general, I can't add as much value as an engine can, and I wouldn't want to pretend to. So anyways, yeah, thank you very much for sending those games, Jack, and yeah, really hope yeah, I hope you guys all have a good night. My next stream is at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much for all sending the games, and I hope this was helpful. Have a good night, everyone. I'll see you later. Bye.